So we're really privileged to have with us tonight our guest speaker, Moira Deeming.
I've been a high school teacher for a bit over 10 years. I'll just be honest, when I first heard about the Safe Schools program, I was busy with that. And I'll be honest, I didn't even bother to read it because I just thought that the rumours about it must be overblown. It could not be true. It was people being hysterical. That could not be in our curriculum. Somebody would have done something about it. No one would dare. That's absurd. So I just brushed it off. I was busy. And I didn't allow bullying in my classrooms, not of gay kids, not of anybody. So I didn't feel in need of someone to help me work out how to stop bullying. But it wasn't until I was on maternity leave and I had kept hearing things that piqued my curiosity when I actually had the time and energy to check it out for myself. Obviously, since I'm here tonight, you can work out that I was absolutely shocked and horrified by what I read. So on a professional level, as a teacher, I was really, really shocked and saddened because I realised straight away when reading it that if this went statewide, if it became compulsory, my teaching career was going to be over because I wouldn't be able to sign a contract upholding these principles where I have to deceive the parents, where I have to present theories about gender as fact. Where I have to tell children things that I don't believe and teach them that disagreement is basically the same as hate, which is what I believe this curriculum really does. There is no room for disagreement in it. It's not teaching children how to talk about politics or ethics, sexual ethics, philosophies about gender. It's not teaching them how to talk about those things reasonably and agree to disagree and get along with people who disagree with them. That's not what this is. It's one view and it's pushed as fact. The main issue for me was that the scope for abuse of power was simply unacceptable. I think that it makes all students less safe. I think it degrades the teaching profession and it totally usurps parental rights. So I'm just going to give you 3 reasons very quickly. It's just a summary, and then all I'm going to do is read through some evidence, actual quotes from the materials for you. I just want to say as well, it depends on the teacher that you get and the school that you get. So a lot of my teaching friends would never ever use the pieces that I'm going to read out to you. And I don't think most teachers would, even teachers that are 100% on board, with promoting a really visible, pro-gay or trans culture out of school. I think most of them would still have the professional sense not to use what I'm going to read out to you. But obviously from Marzina's story, something was going on there. Someone was being extreme. And the fact is that because of this material, I believe that those people running those programs have a legal cover to do that. And clearly, these programs have no respect for individual development. So obviously Marzina's son was not prepared for that material. Should have been able to say, I don't want to be here for this. We all have the right by law to have workplaces free from sexualisation, but our students don't. And even us teachers, now I don't have that right to have a non-sexualised environment in my own classroom that I'm running. I think that it sexually harasses students. This material, you wouldn't be able to do this in a staff room, I can tell you right now. You would not be able to get away with this in a staff room or anyone's workplace for that matter. We all know that sometimes you can get a teacher's word versus a student's word, and often people will just automatically believe the teacher because a child is the one that would lie. So there's a real imbalance of power as well that you need to take into account. And one other thing, it's been subsumed into the Department of Education in Victoria. You're not going to find a Safe Schools resource anymore. What you're going to find is links to the resources that were originally part of the official Safe Schools program. It's now the Safe Schools Coalition, which is just like an advocacy group kind of thing, which promotes resources and things like that. So if you want the links to all the quotes that I read out, I can give them to you, but I don't think that they'll be in the same spot anymore. You'd be able to find them, but it took me 3 days to comb through, and I haven't even gone through it all, and they've released more material, even more extreme material in the time since I wrote this. Okay, so my first reason is that they erode the good and wise professional boundaries between students and teachers. There are lesson plans. They're not just, people are saying there aren't any lesson plans. That's just a lie. I don't know what else to say other than that's just a lie. So the lesson plans don't simply define a few different types of sexuality and encourage tolerance over moral disagreements. They literally require teachers to run whole class discussions about erotic sexuality. They provide resources to use to teach about specific sexual practices such as sex, analingus, threesomes, cunnilingus, masturbation techniques, and dildos. I don't know if you have seen the footage. Students are now taking their phones out in class and filming it. We already have one piece of footage where a female teacher is talking about how to masturbate. She literally says, get into the bath and fondle your breasts. This is in a co-ed class. I'm sorry if this is offensive and upsetting to you, but this is what is going on for our children, which is why I said we shouldn't bring children along tonight. We also have footage of Year 7 children putting condoms on dildos. When I was in school, we had to do a condom lesson, but it was single sex, and I think it was in Year 9 or 10. And our parents were informed first, and were given the right to say yes or no. This was Year 7s, and it was actually out in the courtyard. Imagining, it was out in a courtyard in public in front of whoever else was in the school as well. And I don't know if that was a school that had younger students. And also, what's different about this type of sexual education, it's called comprehensive sexuality education, and that's the umbrella term for it all, is that those severe warnings against sexually transmitted infections, they're gone. They're gone. And it just keeps on saying, just get regular testing. That's a direct quote, just get regular testing. So there is a little documentary that was made using a real young man who contracted AIDS, a young man from St Kilda. And he jokes about how, in a couple of months he contracted 7 different STIs, but it didn't matter because he just got tested. And I thought, of course it doesn't matter, you've got the worst one, you poor thing, you've got AIDS. But the whole documentary wasn't sad. It was all about enjoying sex and sexual freedom and how it wasn't affecting his life. And I thought that gave a message that I just couldn't think of one parent would agree that they would want that type of perspective on AIDS given. I felt very sorry for that young man, and I do think he's got, he can have a life ahead of him, but I don't think that's what we should be promoting as, not a big deal to kids. So we're required also, disturbingly, to run role plays. This is what most of the lesson plans actually consist of, role plays, where children have to imagine and act out in front of their peers, being sexually active, whether or not they are, sexually promiscuous, sexually attracted to the same or both genders, and they have to talk about how they feel as that person. Now, we have never ever before gone into that much detail about heterosexual sex. We've only ever done what was required so that they know how conception happens, how to avoid getting pregnant, how to avoid getting sexually transmitted infections. We haven't gone into the morality of it in a state school, and even in Christian schools where I have taught, we've just said, well, the Christian perspective is this from the Bible, and you can, but you've got to make up your own mind about what you're going to do. You can talk to your parents, that kind of thing. We've tried to stay out of it a little bit and just give, generalised information. And in the past, if a teacher had gone past the boundaries, they would have been reprimanded because it's an abuse of their position of authority. And I hope it is obvious to you all here that giving legitimacy to those type of very erotic conversations in class is going to give legal cover to teachers with ill intent.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, a teacher sexually harassed me. I wasn't believed. And then 7 years later, he was still there, and he had managed to have sex with 3 other girls, and then he was finally sent to jail. Now imagine if he had had the cover of this kind of a program. It was hard enough for me to come forward when I was a student. This is particularly personal. This is why I knew straight away this program was rubbish. These types of things were just terrible for the teaching profession. Students won't be able to say, I've been sexually harassed. They'll say, no, you won't. You were just in a class. It's just part of your education. You weren't being sexually harassed. But we all know how people can leer at you, and it's all a grey area suddenly thanks to this material. Secondly, gender dysphoria and intersex conditions are not simply presented as rare and difficult cases deserving of sympathy and compassion. They're not presented as this modern day ethical dilemma that we have in a multicultural society, which is what it is, which is what we have. What are we going to do about toilets? What are we going to do about change rooms? It's a big debate. It hasn't been settled in wider society, but it's being presented as settled in this material. and schools have to cater to students and teachers who say they are the opposite sex. And there is no bar, there is no low bar, there's no bar at all, so they don't have to change their sex medically, physically, they don't have to change the way they dress, they don't have to change their name, their mannerisms, nothing. And they can just say, I am whatever sex I want, and no one's allowed to stop them going into the change room that they want. Teachers and students. People on the other side love to bring up, poor little students, and I was thinking to myself, what if my colleague wanted to go into a change room with my girls and I was in there? Would I let that person go in there? And I knew straight away, no, I wouldn't let that person go in there. And my students wouldn't want me to let that person come in. And I was going to lose my job if that happened. Of course I would lose my job.
Can you just describe what gender dysphoria is for those who in the room who might not know?
So, gender dysphoria as a term is going to disappear soon. And it's not in the material, actually. This is the point I was going to come to, because it just basically means you don't identify with your biological sex. You don't feel, so I'm biologically female, but if I felt, no, I just feel like I'm a man. I don't feel like I identify with a woman as a female. I'm not like any of the other females that I know. I feel like I wish I was a boy. I feel like I could be a good boy. I feel like I am a boy. I hate my body, but so that's gender dysphoria. But they're just calling it transgenderism now. So it's suddenly not a medical condition, but it hasn't actually been officially removed as a medical condition. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because they say it's not a medical condition and you need to celebrate it. Lots of people are trans without knowing it. But then, you have to get referred for this intense, incredible medical treatment to fix it, apparently. And there is no accurate information in there about details what would happen if you actually did go along and want to have a sex change. I mean, if you look that up on the internet, that is horrific. And if what's being pushed especially is having puberty blockers. If a child has gender dysphoria, this is the last research that I saw, over 80% of them, that's the lowest statistic that I've seen, over 80% of them resolve naturally and do identify with their biological sex if they're allowed to pass through puberty naturally and just deal with that very difficult time and those difficult feelings and just persevere. It goes away naturally, over 80% at the lowest estimate. Whereas if you put them on puberty blockers, we have a 93% success rate where they don't desist, where they're still convinced that they, are an opposite sex. I don't think that's anything to brag about, considering that if you had just left them alone, over 80% of them just could have gone on with their life without having these interventions, which have terrible side effects. You can be permanently infertile. The grisly aspects of the surgery, especially for male to female, they are frightening if you look at that. And if you look up transgender regret or anything like that, and you look up their stories, which are proliferating now all over the place, anyone who has any kind of love for children, genuine love, would want them to try at least to go through puberty and see if it desists. These drugs have known to be cause bone cancer, all kinds of things. And if you do decide, actually I was wrong after starting these puberty blockers and then taking the hormones, you've got permanent changes to your body. Girls get male pattern baldness, you can't get rid of the stubble. Boys, if they grow breasts, they don't just disappear when you stop having the hormone, you have to go and have them removed. There are so many cases of men who literally, not to be too graphic, but have them, have their penises, inverted basically to create a fake vagina, and it's irreversible. Like, that's it. They can never have sex again as a man if they realise that actually that was a mistake. And if you look at the comorbidity of people with gender dysphoria, which just means other psychological issues, it's huge. And of course what we should be doing is treating all those other issues first. Like, so many of them have had very difficult pasts, like lots of children have. And of course girls who have been sexually abused often hate their bodies. They often resent going through puberty. They often resent their breasts and things. That doesn't mean that, they're a boy. It just means they've got extra difficulties. And yes, there's genuine gender dysphoria, I'm not saying there isn't, but this kind of material really does disperse it all amongst all the children. It's not just saying these few people over here have gender dysphoria and we've got to work out how to love them even though we disagree with X, Y, Z. It doesn't say that. It says all of you, your gender is not fixed. You can choose what gender you are, and it says literally, and I quote, and it can change from day to day, hour to hour. And you're supposed to, as a teacher and all the students, use the correct pronoun that they then choose. Imagine if you had a friend who said they were a boy 1 hour and a girl the next, and you had to change pronoun use. Do you think anyone is going to be friends with that kid? Not out of hate, but out of stress. Because you are absolutely bullied and lambasted if you get a pronoun wrong. There's heaps of stuff in the material about how disrespectful it is. It's called dead naming someone if you get their pronoun wrong, like you've killed them with your words. It's really horrific. It's like hate speech if you get their pronoun wrong. It's very stressful as a teacher. I'm not allowed to say boys or girls. I'm not even allowed to say guys. I say guys all the time. I considered that a kind of a unisex thing. I was like, But no, it's offensive. So many things are now offensive and so sensitive that I actually think this is going to work against kids with gender dysphoria who are struggling with it. I think it's going to work against them. And that makes me sad because it's not promoting this, grace between people who disagree on things. It's not promoting grace or communication or any space in which you can disagree but live together. It's not like that. There are consequences. It talks a lot in the material about how to be an ally to transgender kids. And what's the opposite of an ally? An enemy. So if you're not with them, you're against them. You can't be in just loving disagreement in this material. It's not there. It is really, really pernicious, this stuff. There's no proper medical definition. There's no outlines of treatment options. There's no pros and cons. It's not balanced at all. There's no statistics. So when I teach about anything else, AIDS, anorexia, anything else, it's just standard. You bring up all the stats, you define it medically, blah, blah, blah. But gender itself is presented now as an exciting journey of discovery. It starts in kinder with that book, The Gender Fair. It says nobody can tell you if you're a boy or a girl. Nobody's allowed to tell you that. You get to decide. Gender is presented as fluid, as limitless, and not just between two genders. They say it's just between two genders. It changes. Sometimes it does have binary gender, and then sometimes it doesn't. It has, limitless gender. So they list 12 last time I checked, 12 genders across the spectrum. So they had male, female, and then they had all these other ones in the middle. And no one is going to feel good enough or masculine enough. No boy is going to feel masculine enough to identify as male. And no girl is going to feel feminine enough to identify as just female, in my opinion. If I reflect back when I was in school, partly because of that teacher, I was a real tomboy. I didn't like that I was, growing older and going through puberty. I really hated it. I didn't like showing my figure. I didn't like that I looked, girly. I used to be a real tomboy, and I would have been primed for thinking that I was a boy because I hated my femininity. But you can hate your femininity or your masculinity for all kinds of other reasons, and they don't go into that. There's no balance. So they give you these options, and the examples they give you are that if you like ballet, or and you're a boy, or if you like pink and you're a boy, and they have these clips, a set of clips where they give you these reasons, and I just think that's ridiculous. Have you seen male ballerinas? They're not feminine. They're amazing. They're full of muscle. They're athletes. And I had boys who could sing in these beautiful deep voices and high voices. I had girls who were fantastic at soccer. I had some girls who just embarrassed the boys. It was hilarious. And we all loved that because it was great. But we just didn't think, maybe she's a boy. Nobody thought that. Who thought that? I thought we were moving on from those kind of stereotypes. But we're not. We're right back into those stereotypes. They are using those stereotypes to make children think that they're not legitimate females or males, that there must be something in the middle just because they're not this hyper-feminine or hyper-masculine person. And nobody is. No one's that. Ken and Barbie maybe, but they don't exist. So, it's just ridiculous. And they act as though it's got no more dire consequences than choosing different coloured socks. Honestly, it is presented as a fun journey, as just this thing that you can dabble in here, and if that doesn't seem right, well, you just move over here, no consequences. Whereas if you look at the suicide rate in people who are transgender, I've seen, all around the world, it's around about 40% in that population to 4% in the rest of the population. It's huge. Why would you want to set your child, or every child for no good reason, down on a path of mucking around with gender in their own mind? You're setting them onto this really, a rabbit hole of subjectivity. Because there's no real definition of either. Then they've just destroyed the idea of defining male or femaleness anyway. It's a rabbit hole. There's no solid ground. You know, so it's no wonder, I think, that they have to say that it can chop and change, because nothing, you know, you can't feel female or male based on a bunch of stereotypes for very long. So no questioning of the theory is allowed in the materials, and there are caricatures of people who disagree, and they're sort of mocked, or they're just labelled as non-allies, like I said, enemies. So as a teacher, I'm required to present this theory as settled science, which I will not do, because it is not settled science. Like everybody in that field admits it. You hear, if you listen carefully to their language, they say, what we're finding is, and I'm thinking, well, when you've actually found it and proven it, then maybe I will tell my students. Until that day, there is no way. And they'll say, you know, it's in the nascent stages, but what we're finding increasingly is blah, blah, blah. No, that's rubbish. We don't experiment on our children. We should wait. We should wait. You know, and I think we'll be waiting forever if we did wait, which is, I think, what they know, which is why they're pushing it beforehand. And they keep on saying, you know, you're killing gay kids, you're killing trans kids because they commit suicide. That's the kind of argument that is levelled against me, that I must hate gay children, I must hate gay teachers, I must hate trans children. Whereas actually it's all out of concern. I think they're being exploited, and I think the rest of the children are being unnecessarily confused. And this was, all of this extra sex stuff, what's that got to do with bullying? Why is that in there? There is no good reason. Not based on bullying anyway. So thirdly, my last point is that, you know, I'm a teacher. I do not have a degree in medicine. I don't have a degree in psychology. I can't think of anyone that I've ever met who's a teacher who does. But these programs give me and other teachers the authority to facilitate a student to socially transition. That means live as a different gender at school, uniform, name, pronouns included. I can punish other students, I can punish them, and I would be expected to punish them for not using the pronouns this kid demands, behind parents' backs and without an official medical diagnosis. So I'll read you the quote later when I read you the actual direct materials, but if a teacher or school thinks that a family is not likely to affirm their child's new or decided gender, we are literally directed to lie to that family and withhold the information whilst helping the child live out their new gender at school. Where are the studies to reassure me that that's not going to be damaging to that child? There aren't any. There aren't any. Socially transitioning is huge. I think that would have a massive psychological impact, and I'm not a psychologist, I know, but it makes sense. I'm doing it behind the parents' backs, and I'm lying to the parents, and all the kids know that you're lying to the parents. So just imagine me at parent-teacher interviews. The kid turns up now as Jimmy when, you know, for the last 3 months he's been living as Julia, and I've been harassing everyone to call him a she. And now I have to suddenly call him a he and deceive those parents. Oh, there's no way I'm doing that, no way. And if someone ever did that to me, oh, you know, the fire of 1,000 suns would come down. Because how dare they? How dare anyone lie to you about your own children? This is a medical issue apparently. And if there's no official medical diagnosis, you can still be lied to about it. I mean, what is going on? Parents are seriously being undermined, in my opinion, here. And teachers are the little foot soldiers that have to go out and do it. Just think about this, because we've got other programs coming in as well. So we've got a Doctors in Schools program. Have you heard about that? Doctors are now coming into schools, and lawyers. And they've all come in the same time as this material. Now, in the material, it specifically uses the language of mature minor, which is a legal term, and it means that you're emancipated from your parents and you don't need their permission to start medical treatment. I've got a couple of issues with these policies, which are basically, you know, the fact that they usurp parental rights, and they're just pushing parents out of their own children's lives, which I don't think is healthy. Who's the number one defender of children in almost all cases? Their best defenders, their best ally, the things that increase a child's outcome, you know, good outcomes in life in almost every sector. It's their parents, especially if they've got mum and dad. You know, any study will tell you that. And they're being pushed out. And you're not even being told that you're being pushed out. It's all happening behind your back. So students can now book in to see a doctor. So it's not in every school. There were 100 pilot schools, but it'd be worth asking about at your school. They bring in a doctor, and then after the first session, I think you're told about the first session, but the doctor then can deem your child to be a mature minor, and you will not find out about any others. And if the child is older than that, I can't remember what age it's from. It might actually be 13. I'm sorry, I can't remember what age it is, but there's a certain age that's younger than what I thought. It's not 16 like I thought it was, where you're not allowed to access their medical records afterwards.
14.
Is it 14? There you go. Okay, and you're not going to be told, and they can be deemed a mature minor, and then they can start getting treatment they can get abortions, they can get treated for sexually transmitted infections, they can start gender transitioning therapies, all without their parents knowing. Now, I don't know about you, but if my daughter had to remember what she was allergic to, or if she had to remember to take a tablet without me helping her, there is no way that would work. I mean, they're children. There are so many millions of ways in which this can go wrong. The first thing I thought was that whose idea was it to allow children as young as 12 alone in a room at school with an adult who's allowed to put their hands on them and medically examine them, let alone prescribe drugs? If I knew a teacher was alone in a room with a student, I would barge in there.
Yeah.
I would get fired if I did that if it was a doctor. The scope for abuse is enormous. Enormous. If I was a doctor, I wouldn't touch that program with a 50-foot pole. You would never ever see me alone in a room with a child because I'm not an idiot. It's protecting the child and it's protecting me. As a teacher, I'm not alone in a room with children because it protects the child and it protects me. You know, it's ridiculous. So if you're uncomfortable with that kind of risk, I suggest you check with your schools what's going on there as well. And if I mentioned that the child had gone to see a doctor to the parent, I could be fired because that's privileged information. And I would know, just because I would wonder where, Jimmy was in math class. And one of his friends would invariably say, oh, he's gone to see the doctor, because the kids don't understand that he shouldn't have told me that. And you won't know what's going on with your child. Like I might have found out from other kids, because they tell you, they're worried, because, such and such had an abortion, she's really sad, miss, that's why she's in the toilets for so long. And I do end up finding out things like that. But the parents so far have always known. But this time, like if I find out that kind of information and then a parent rings me up saying, something's wrong with my daughter, something happened at school, is she being bullied? And I would think, I know what has happened to your daughter, but I can't tell you. It puts people in a ridiculous position. So lastly, I don't think it's right or the best that we can do to allow anyone who identifies as the opposite sex into the bathrooms of their choice. And I already told you my rationale for that. So already, you're not allowed to be told if there's a transgender student in your child's year level or cohort. So already we've had heaps of parents have their children come home and say, oh, we had a boy in our room, in our dorm with us at camp. Who said he was a girl, and of course there's all that confusion that they go home and tell mum and dad. Now because it's privileged private information about another student, they weren't allowed to tell the parents. And I understand that, but you don't have to tell them who without, you could still tell the parents, we have a transgender student, do you have an issue? Or do your children feel comfortable having that person in the room? Because that's the other thing. This is, a classic, balancing of two rights, isn't it? And yet other children's rights are not being considered at all. I can guarantee you if a child says they're uncomfortable having a transgender student in their bathroom or the showers or their toilets or their camp room or whatever, they will be painted as a hateful bigot. Because that's all there is in this material. That's the only option. Or an ignoramus, that's the other thing. Just an ignorant person who can just be brushed aside. Old-fashioned. It's often, they're often Christian and religious, in the material. They had one example of someone who was a Christian and had a problem with it at first, but then they came around, so there are good Christians if they agree, and there are bad Christians if they don't agree.